everyone, and welcome to the second annual Fall 6G Symposium. I'm Doug Castor, a Senior Director in InterDigital's Research and Innovation Group. And by my side to open up today's event is Dr. Thomas Melodia, who is Director of Research and who's Director of the Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things at Northeastern University. InterDigital and Northeastern are the founding partners of the 6G Symposium, and this year we're pleased to have ADIS's NextG Alliance join us as organizing partners. NextG Alliance is an initiative formed late last year with over 50 member companies and universities that have come together to build a plan for 6G leadership in North America. Their work started in the spring, and you'll be hearing from NextG Alliance's leaders embedded into our panels, along with a keynote from Mike Naraki, from ADIS, and that keynote will be tomorrow. So thank you, NextG Alliance, for your support at this year's event and for paving the way for North America beyond 5G initiatives. So if we could just go to slide 2. So in today's opening session, we have a packed agenda of North American leaders who will be providing their thoughts on the next decade of wireless. And we'll start off in just a few moments with a fireside chat from Congressman Robert Latta of Ohio's 5th District, and then we'll hear opening remarks from InterDigital's President and CEO, Liren Chen, followed by opening remarks from Northeastern's Dean of Engineering, Dr. Gregory Abode. So following that will be a keynote from AT&T's CTO of Network Services, Andre Feuich, and finally a fireside chat from 2 former FCC commissioners, Jonathan Aldelstein and Mike O'Reilly. Okay, so if we could just go to the next slide. So we'll start the title.
No, I gotta go to the eye doctor.
So we set the title of this opening session as The Decade Creating 6G. And before we get started, I'd like to take a few moments to reflect on what a decade of progress can bring. And let's do that by looking back to where we were 10 years ago. Progress is often hard to measure year by year, but little by little becomes a lot when measured over a generation. It was only around 10 years ago that the first iPad was launched, and we saw the start of social media applications such as Facebook going mobile, Twitter and Instagram began. And these are mainstream today. And 10 years from now, we're on the path to holographic experiences, perhaps something like Princess Leia's famous scene from Star Wars in the late 70s, the "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." You know, these enhancements in communication are fueled by our basic human need for social interaction. Putting the digital human experience on par with an actual face-to-face live encounter can feed that need and is an ambitious goal for 6G. You know, another example we have is Uber, which launched only 10 years ago, and it's widely used in over 10,000 cities, along with many other mobile applications that enable sharing economies, rapid access to services. And as we build more trusted and reliable networks, it's easy to imagine more and more critical services, you know, healthcare, transportation, delivery of goods, and education. And all these become more accessible and immediately available at a lower cost. And there's so many other examples of advances that mobile wireless has delivered over the last 10 years that have had great social impacts, such as getting healthcare during a pandemic. You know, remote healthcare was up 350% last year, or using social media to expose the unacceptable behaviors by certain people or groups. So when we think about bold visions for the next 10 years leading us to 6G, the past tells us that great leaps can happen in 10 years if we keep up the progress year by year. And I'm sure many of our speakers have thoughts on the visions for 6G. So please don't hesitate to ask them questions in the chat so that we can have a lively discussion. Questions may be tight in this opening session, but certainly throughout the next 2 days, we should have time to address them. So I look forward to these next 2 days. Tommaso, if you can tell us about what we have planned during those days. Tommaso, are you there?
Yes, I think, can you hear me, Doug?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Doug. I think we have certainly exciting years ahead of us. So when we started the 6G Symposium last year, our hope was really to create a community of people that will work together to shape a future for wireless in North America and to align technology goals and societal needs for the common good. So several other events that are focused on 6G have appeared in the meanwhile. And I think that's great, right? Many recognize today the need for bringing government, academia, and industry together early on to shape a vision for the technologies, for the applications, and for the societal impact of 6G. Now, in the next 2 days, we're going to try to do just that. Right? I'm not sure that we'll be able to save the galaxy from the Imperial Army, as you were suggesting we do, but I'm pretty sure that will contribute to shaping a vision and the community toward this goal. We have a number of pretty exciting panels. So after the keynote session today, the first panel will be focused on understanding if and why we need 6G. So we will talk about where the real value of 6G lies for our society and for industry. And so we'll be looking for a value proposition to use business terms. Then we'll talk about some very cool technologies and the role that they will play in 6G. So in services from the sky, satellite and UAVs beyond 5G, we will discuss how to bring pervasive wireless connectivity from the sky, the space internet, and the role of UAVs. We will then have 2 twin sessions titled Revolution is in the Air. The first one will cover advances in the air interface, and the second one, future spectrum exploitation. How do we operate at new high frequency bands and how that will be crucial for 6G? Pretty much what we called last year conquering the spectrum, but we'll also cover efficient use of the mid bands through spectrum sharing. And finally, we will conclude with a session on US government initiatives beyond 5G, moderated by Manu Gossein here at Northeastern, played a key role in conceiving and organizing the 6G Symposium. We'll then hear about some of the key initiatives shaping research priorities in the United States, discuss how government, industry, and academia can best work together towards a common goal. Okay, then tomorrow, we'll start with a keynote from Mike Naroki, who will be telling us about the role of the 80s Next G Alliance in developing a pathway for North American leadership beyond 5G. And then we'll follow with panels that touch on what I believe are some of the main research questions in our journey toward the 6G. First, is there a role for quantum cryptography, for quantum information processing and communication in 6G? Or are we still far from that? Second, will 6G be a cloud-native network architecture? Or will it be based on more traditional architectures? What will be the role of edge computing? Then we'll start asking the question of whether our approaches to security will have to be fundamentally different from what we see today. Will 6G be developed with a security by design approach, or will security be an afterthought? And finally, we'll have 2 panels that are very close to the intellectual pursuit of our group at the Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things at Northeastern. First, what is the future of Open RAN? Is 6G going to be based on an Open RAN architecture? With our panelists, we're going to try to investigate the balance between the dual nature of Open RAN technologies. First, as an enabler for zero-touch control through abstractions and interfaces that enable AI-based control, but also as a technology with the potential to break vendor lock-in through disaggregation and standardized interfaces. And last, and very much related to the Open RAN panel, will 6G be ready for native AI and machine learning? Okay, so without further ado, let me ask InterDigital's Communication Director, Richard Lloyd, to kick off our discussion with Congressman Robert Latta. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Tommaso. Thank you, Doug, for that introduction. As you can see, we have a very, very packed 2 days, but I'm delighted to be able to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, who is Congressman Bob Latta, who has kindly agreed to join me for a fireside chat to get things moving. Congressman Latta has represented Ohio's 5th congressional district since 2007. He is a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where, among other things, he helped shape the US's telecoms policy. He is also the Republican leader of the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. So, in short, he is one of the legislators on Capitol Hill who really understands the importance of connectivity and the role it can play in the country's economic growth, particularly to ensure that it benefits every American. Congressman Latta, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks very much for having me today. Really appreciate it.
So you will have seen from Tommaso's introduction that the theme this morning is the decade creating 6G. There's lots that we're going to touch on over the next 2 days, but as we start, here we are in the early days of imagining what 6G might look like. What do you hope are going to be some of the benefits that we see from 6G?
Well, again, thanks very much for having me. And it's so important that you're with the conference that you're having, because again, we want to make sure that the world's leading out there and getting what they need. As we talked about 5G years back, people were saying, well, what is it? What's it going to do? But it's the speeds, it's the ability to do more things with it. When I think back over the last 18 months with COVID, where we'd be today if we didn't have the different technology, the different speeds out there. And so when I think about everything from, telehealth and what we've been able to do with that, weeks before COVID struck, we were still being told that, well, telehealth would never work. 3 weeks after it struck, we're being told that if we didn't have telehealth, we'd have been in a horrible situation in this country. When I think about precision agriculture for my district and the legislation I did in the past farm bill that helps farmers, you can go across the entire area and look at what we can be able to do with the increase in speed, and we don't even know all of the different things that it will be able to accomplish, but it will be out there. And so when I think about from everyone that had to do all of the telework for over a year, and then so many companies finding how well it worked that they're going to tell their employees to stay home and just keep working at home. When I think about autonomous vehicles, we can go down the entire line, but there's so many things that will be accomplished with going up to 6G and with the technology that we're going to have. So I think it's exciting and looking forward to it.
What role, when you look at yourself, your colleagues on the Hill, what role do you think policymakers can play in aiding the development of 6G and in ensuring that the US is playing a leading role in it?
Well, I think first of all that we want to encourage that the companies out there and the innovators are looking at the international standards and making sure that they have those. So when they're out there innovating, that technological development, enables that innovation, that you've got that interoperability. But it's so important that, we have that to begin with. Again, Congress plays an important role, and you might be hearing me say this multiple times this morning, but, serving on the Energy and Commerce Committee, it's the greatest committee on the Hill. More bills come out of our committee than any other. But, when we sit up on the dais, we're listening to people out there and the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the companies that are out there with the technology, with that development. They're not looking backwards. They're not looking in a rear view mirror. They're looking over the horizon 5 to 10 years. And that's what we have to be doing in Congress. We have to make sure that, we're getting the right laws in place and then the right regulations go into place that make sure that we're not inhibiting that growth. So it's important that, we're working with the departments and agencies, that they're working together to make sure that they're getting the right, as I said, regulations into place, that we're not hindering, that we're fostering that innovation that we want to see created. So those are the things that some of the important things we have to make sure that we're getting done. But again, it's, as I said, it's, when you think about NTIA, FCC, that they're working together, making sure that we have the spectrum out there, how we're going to get that spectrum. But these are all these issues that we have to be working with. But again, listening to the people out there in the companies who are on the front lines.
I'll come back to that spectrum point in a minute. I did want to follow up on that. But is there anything that, just staying on this kind of US political piece, is there anything that the US government, should the US government be funding more of the fundamental research here in order to control the intellectual property? Or do you think there are other ways to encourage that outcome?
Well, and again, looking back in the last year and a half, when we think about the $1.8 trillion of investments that has been done by the companies out there, that wasn't done by the government, it was done by the companies. And they really ensured that we had, the broadband that we had to have. When I think about what happened in the United States, where some people thought that maybe we might see a contraction out there, but we saw an expansion. So I think that the government has a big role to play in making sure that we're working, again, that we're not hindering the development, or we want to make sure that we're fostering the innovation out there. When it comes to grants and things like that, that's something you might be looking at. But I think the big part that government has to play, especially in our case, the federal government, we want to make sure, in my opinion, that we're helping, not hindering the companies out there to get this out to the public and to the companies.
Research in an area like this is often, certainly, the fundamental research that goes in is often very much a collaborative effort. Be that amongst companies and be that with other research institutes or universities. Do you think there are different or perhaps better forms of collaboration that might be enacted, that might be encouraged?
Well, and again, in energy and commerce, when we have the hearings and you meet with and have the ability to meet with those innovators, the entrepreneurs and the companies, one of the biggest things that we need to do, and I'm a firm believer in it, is listening and talking with these folks, because it's important. Because I know I worked on the autonomous vehicle legislation that was passed a couple of Congresses ago. Unfortunately, it didn't get through the Senate, but we got it through the House. And every time I met with companies out there that were working in this field, I'd ask everybody the same thing. Are you where you thought you'd be 5 years ago? And everybody told me the exact same thing. No, we're much farther ahead. So that's why I think it's important that, in getting these laws on the books that are going to help, not hinder. And it's really, we have a lot of listening that we have to do, because if we start going off on our own, we might think we have it right. But if we don't listen to the folks out there that are on the front lines, we're going to put things behind, and it's going to be very difficult to catch back up then. You
touched on the issue of spectrum earlier. I know this is something that you've been focused on in terms of freeing up more spectrum for 5G use. With 6G in mind, do you think we should be reviewing how the spectrum is allocated and shared and used?
Well, we passed legislation in the last year for the agencies, the departments go out there and look what's out there and see what we have. Because again, it's important, because we have a lot of use out there that we have, that everybody's needing more and more. It's not that we need less spectrum, we need a lot more. And there's only a finite amount of it. So how do we get to that point? So I'm a firm believer that we have to go to the departments and agencies to see what they have and what they can do to make sure that we can get it out there, and so it's utilized. There's certain cases. You look at Department of Defense; they have their applications they have to have, and we have to be very careful there. But it's really once a lot of agencies are very particular that once they have something, they say, well, we don't really want to give it up. But I've sat through a lot of meetings where I heard an absolute definite no, and then a few months later, then becomes, well, a maybe. Then yeah, maybe we can do that. So it's important that in our case that we're working with the departments and agencies to try to free up as much as we possibly can.
One of the topics, as you heard earlier from Doug and Tommaso's introduction, of the next 2 days is looking at the different types of technology that 6G or whatever comes after 5G is kind of likely to touch upon. And there's a sense that with 6G that it will become increasingly entwined with other emerging technologies, be it AI, be it quantum computing, be it holography that Doug referred to. Is there a need for congressional guidance here that spans different types of technology? So you're not just looking at whatever sort of 6G comes to stand for.
Well, and again, I don't think everyone even knows exactly what we can do with all the applications. And when I think about, for instance, what I mentioned a little bit earlier, I worked on the autonomous vehicle legislation, what we're going to need there. it's absolutely amazing what we can do, and the safety that will come from it, and saving lives. So again, it's what Congress has to be able to do is, I hate to say look into a crystal ball because, we want to make sure we get things right. But it's really when we come look at the applications, and as you mentioned, all the different things from AI and everything else, we have to make sure that we're getting it right. And again, I'm a firm believer that I have to be out on the road a lot. I have to listen to the companies and the developers that are out there, the innovators, that we're seeing exactly what can be done. Because again, as we started your session today, and just hearing about what could be on the horizon with 6G, we don't even know all of it yet, and so that's why I think it's important that we get this framework done and get it done right, so that we can make sure that we can be a help and not a hindrance.
The rollout of 5G has certainly attracted plenty of headlines around national security, concerning equipment vulnerability in networks around the world. How can the US ensure that we don't see some of those same concerns in the development of 6G?
Well, right off the bat, I think you can't say with in any area of technology today in the same sentence without using cybersecurity. And it's absolutely essential that cyber is always on the top of our mind. We know what happened with Huawei, and with the legislation we had with the rip and replace. We have to make sure that as on the federal side, that we and we do take it very seriously. When I've been out with different companies, and you can name wherever they are or whatever they do, a massive amount of their money today is going into cyber, and that cybersecurity out there, that they have to absolutely make sure that they're protected. And because again, we're seeing, when you think about the millions of attacks that are occurring every day, that we have to make sure that we're, on the private and the public side, that we are protected. But it's making sure that, we have trusted equipment out there that's going in. We have to, on the Balk Power side, I had CyberSense legislation. I've worked on improving the grid. It's so, as I said, it goes across everything out there. But again, when I did the autonomous vehicle legislation, one of the things that was on the top of my mind and what we were working on was cyber, because you don't want to have a situation where people think that, well, if I have a car that's autonomous, I don't want somebody to be able to get control of it and take it over. It's the supply chain is so important. It's making sure that it's trusted. It's making sure that folks know that the equipment and the components that are going into it are cyber secure. So the federal government's role is to helping to ensure that happens. Again, we don't want to see what happened on the Huawei side on the autonomous side. Because again, people aren't going to get in a vehicle thinks that somebody can gain control of it and take them off a cliff. So it's important that people have total faith in what they're using out there.
You mentioned the subject of supply chains. I know that you were part of a recent effort to raise concerns over the Biden administration's decision to approve the sale of chips to Huawei for the company's auto business. With those supply chains only becoming more complex, how concerned are you that the US has the right tools to police the supply chains in critical technologies such as semiconductors and wireless?
Well, again, when you talk about I did sign on the letter that went to the president, really questioning about the sale of these components, because again, it's absolutely essential that we're protected. When you're thinking about what this technology would be used for, or those chips would be used for, it's vital that we're protected. And I think, again, it's making sure that, again, I think that what the COVID epidemic also pointed out was that we have massive problems in our supply chain across the entire gamut of everything that we do. But in this case, we have to make sure that we have a supply chain that we can get the parts when we need them, or especially the chips. And so it's how do we make sure that we're getting the chips from when we need them. I know that I represent an area that's heavily automotive, and there are a lot of plants that are closing down because they can't get chips. So how do we shorten the supply chain? How do we have more produced in this country? Yeah, it's something that might not be accomplished in a short term because we're just getting it built, but it's something, in my opinion, we have to look into the future to say that we got to get this thing done, because again, supply chain is absolutely essential to everything that we do.
This is, of course, a highly competitive area. There's been a sort of added geopolitical edge added to conversations around 5G and the rollout there. And there's a sense that the US has lost ground to some other countries like China in the ownership of some of the fundamental intellectual property behind 5G. You can see that in certainly some of the numbers around how Chinese companies dominate the sort of 5G patent landscape. That has come, of course, as the US has weakened its patent system. So to what extent does the US need to prioritize strong IP rights here to ensure that it doesn't lose control of the key 6G technology?
Well, and again, it's important for American companies, for companies that do business here, that when you go out and spend millions and millions of dollars, that it's protected, that you have your patents out there. This is an area that the House Judiciary Committee would have jurisdiction over. I know in years past, there's been a lot of discussion and work in the Judiciary Committee in regards to patents, but patent law is an area that we have to be very concerned on, and making sure that we are protected in this country and that we've got the right laws on the books. And so this is, again, where the Judiciary Committee will be doing its work.
I know that you have spent time looking at how connectivity can benefit all of America, not just the largest cities, but rural communities as well. And with the discussion now turning to 6G, how can we ensure that we deliver and improve on connectivity for all Americans?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, you're absolutely right. I've been very concerned for years about rural America out there. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Rural Broadband Caucus. We want to make, and this is an issue that I tell folks, it's not a Republican, Democrat, independent issue. This is an issue that affects everybody. If you don't have, just think, if you don't have broadband, you've got a problem. We know that in COVID, that especially parts of my district, kids couldn't do their homework or even do their schoolwork from home because they didn't have the connectivity that they needed to have. So when I think about businesses out there that would like to go into more rural areas and not always have to be around a more urban or suburban area, this is an area that's been a great concern. And so, making sure that we have the right maps. And I know that I'm working with the FCC, and I see that former Commissioner O'Reilly, who's been in my district twice, who will be one of your speakers today, he knows it well. He's been out, and other commissioners have been out, but they go around to see what's happening, especially in rural America, to make sure that we get it. And so but my big part of it is that I know when the FCC several years back had the maps out that we looked at, that we said, look, we have to have accurate maps. If you don't have accurate maps, you don't know where these unserved areas are. We want to make sure that they get help as soon as possible. And so, these are the things that we've been working on to make sure it gets done. In the committee, I know is on the Republican side that we want to make sure that we've got laws on the books that, we can streamline the processes out there, that permitting isn't something that's very an onerous thing to get done. And so getting rid of a lot of this red tape that's not needed. So but again, it's looking for the areas that are unserved and helping them, because again, this is what we have to do in this country to make sure that we get everybody connected.
Just finally, I know you have a hard stop at 10 a.m. Eastern. So if there's one thing that you would like the audience to take away from this conversation, an idea or an action, what would that be?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I tell you, I think the number one thing that we have to hear is to hear from everybody that's on today. It's so important that we hear from you, because again, we can't do our jobs unless we hear from the people and the companies out there that are on the forefront of this technology. we have to make sure that we're getting it right. And that's by hearing it and seeing it. I love being out all the time across my district and when I can get across the country to go to businesses. It's just like when I've been in a lot of startups, one of the things I've always commented on when I go to a startup is this. You have a lot of people there working on what they want to get done, but one of the things they usually don't see in the corner are the compliance officer and attorney, with a stop and go sign. They're out there trying to get their product and what they want to get developed. So it's really up to us to hear from you all and to work with you all to make sure that we're getting it right, because we are. One of the wonderful things, again, they mentioned, sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee, we're looking over the horizon 5 to 10 years, and we should never be looking in the rearview mirror. Never look at the front end of the car, because I never forget when I was in driver's ed a long time ago, our wrestling coach at the high school told us, don't look at the end of it, you just passed it. So, we want to make sure that we're hearing from everybody that's out there. And so I encourage people to come to my office. We're reopened. Love to have people come in and to sit down and talk about the issues that are really important to you and how we're going to get you to the forefront of this technology into the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
To wrap it up, we appreciate your time today, and thank you very much for getting the 6G Symposium started. So thank you, and
thank
you.
Okay, thank you, Congressman Latta. We really appreciate your messages today to start off our symposium and for your continued leadership in Congress over these technology matters. So thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you, Richard, for driving that dialogue. Okay, so we'll continue now with opening remarks, and I'd like to introduce Liren Chen, who is InterDigital's president and CEO. Liren joined InterDigital this April after many years of leadership at Qualcomm and brings to InterDigital a passion for achieving great things through collaboration together across the industry. The 6G Symposium is just one way of doing that, and we thank you for joining us this morning, Liren, and I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Doug. Hey, thank you, Congressman Latta, and thank you, Richard. What a great discussion. I mean, it's a fantastic week to get us started. And again, good morning and welcome for those of you who are on West Coast. And I really appreciate you guys get up early to join this discussion. There's nothing gets you going to talk about 6G, early in the morning. Again, my name is Liren Chen. I'm the president and CEO of InterDigital. So it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the 6G Symposium. This is somewhat a unique event because we are bringing together participants from government agencies, academia, and the telecom industry to build a very strong North American position beyond 5G and to address all the changing needs in our region in these coming decades. So this event has attracted more than 1,500 technology, business, and policy experts from across all these different aspects of the ecosystem. And it's really my great pleasure to be part of this event. Understanding a topic as complex and as evolving as 6G requires a lot of strategic inputs and collaboration from all the diverse stakeholders to address all sides of this ecosystem needs. InterDigital is very much honored to work alongside Northeastern University, Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things, and the ADAS Next-G Alliance as organizing sponsor of this symposium to create an agenda as diverse as we have seen that explores all the technology, academic, and political aspects that shape the future, and in the same time as will be shaped by 6G also. You will hear shortly from Northeastern University Dean of Engineering, Greg Abel, and members from ADAS throughout the symposium, and this group has been fully collaborative partners of InterDigital in shaping and driving support for this event. So thank you very much. As we continue to tackle new research beyond 5G and into 6G, InterDigital is exploring not just how we can make 6G faster, how we can get broader coverage for the network, but also how to achieve ultra reliability, ultra low power consumption, and getting much higher accurate position services. As Congressman Latta has mentioned, autonomous vehicle driving, and those are the key features that enable those critical use cases. 6G will be characterized by a very complex inner work of virtualized networks, cloud and edge computing, enterprise IoT, artificial intelligence, and driven by the potential to unify all these features into an even more powerful generational wireless network. With more powerful network, we will also see much more devices than ever fueling the ecosystem. And we fully expect 6G to be much more complex than 5G, which is why we are investing research into technology that will complement and enhance 5G, including AI, advanced video interfacing, mobile edge computing, blockchains, some of the security features, and much, much more. Throughout the research, we are revamping the wheels, building upon the foundations of our trusted innovations, and we are creating new capabilities, and we are increasing dramatically the potential in wireless. Shaping the future of wireless has always been very important for InterDigital. We were founded almost 50 years ago. We created foundational research that contribute to every generation of wireless, including 5G, and we are significantly expanding our portfolio along the way. We have added a lot of new capability in our R&D team, and we have built a portfolio that's really broad and deep. Through our strategic research and development effort in the standard body, we have worked very tirelessly to develop the features and functions that defines 5G, from millimeter wave mobility, MIMO beam management, to spectrum aggregations, to lower latency, ultra reliability communications, and much, much more. Similar to Congressman Latta has mentioned, we also look at the future for at least 5 to 10 years. And we do research ahead of time, and our expertise in 5G is a result of our in-house innovation, as well as our strategic collaboration with industry partners to expand the benefit and share our technology. So we share our technology primarily through our licensing program. In 2023 alone, we are on pace to license over 800 million devices, including smartphones and other connected devices. For the last decade alone, we have licensed over 6 billion devices. That's a billion with a B for the last decade alone. So we take great pride in our research and development and in the portfolio we have created, and we like to foster innovations through our broad partnership by linking researchers, policymakers, and industry decision makers together, just as we are doing today. Over the next 2 days, you will hear expert speakers from across government agencies, academia, and telecom industry to address a very wide range of topics. And this will enhance our understanding for 6G value proposition, the changes facing the technology designs, such as area interface, the government initiatives beyond 5G, like spectrum allocations, artificial intelligence, open RAN architecture, and quantum internet, and much, much more. So on behalf of InterDigital, I'd like to welcome all the leaders from the industry, from government agencies, and from academia who help us shape the current generation of wireless, and they for sure will drive the future into 6G. We especially welcome our esteemed member of Congress and government, their participation and their perspective, blending with our industry experts' view that truly make this 6G symposium a valuable and really a unique event in the industry. We are pleased to welcome Congressman Robert Latta of Ohio, Congressman Bill Foster of Illinois, and Congresswoman Linda McClain of Michigan, as well as former FCC Commissioner Michael O'Reilly and Jonathan Adelstein to this symposium. Fueled by cross-functional collaborations and partnership to enhance the value of our innovation, I'm very confident 6G will raise the bar of our innovation and will unleash a new tide of wireless innovation as we work together. This symposium at year 2 is a wonderful event for us to keep on making progress. So thank you all, and I'm blessed and honored to be able to speak to this audience. And now I want to hand the floor to Northeastern University Dean of Engineering, Greg Obod. Thank you.
Thank you, Liren, for your remarks. We very much appreciate our partnership with InterDigital. So as you were mentioning, we also have new leadership at Northeastern. Professor Gregory Abbaud joined Northeastern University as the Dean of Engineering last spring after a stellar career at Georgia Tech in the field of ubiquitous computing and human-computer interaction. Gregory, thanks for joining us this morning. Floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Tommaso. So hello to everyone, and thank you for giving me this chance to welcome everyone on behalf of Northeastern University and the College of Engineering. Thanks to the organizers and Congressman Latta and Liren Chen for their opening thoughts as well. Northeastern prides itself on being a use-inspired institution, constantly looking for ways to lead in areas that matter outside of just our academic community's boundaries. The College of Engineering has a proud history of doing this kind of work, and the Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things, led by Tommaso, is a shining example of that kind of leadership. For those not familiar with Northeastern, our College of Engineering, and the Institute for the Wireless Internet of Things, I want to share just a few notes. Through the leadership of Tommaso, we've recruited world-class faculty, assembled unique research facilities, and taken on a national leadership role in innovation in the wireless space through the oversight of the NSF Power Project Office. That latter example shows the importance of strong connections between industry, academia, and local communities. Now, I'm a technology researcher, but I recognize that technologies alone are not what matters in today's world. It's the use of those technologies and how that use influences our human experience that really drives adoption. With this inevitable push towards 6G technologies, we're seeing the increased connection between the physical world and the digital world. 6G will connect people with much faster wireless links than possible today. But it will also create a distributed interface between people, the physical world where we live and operate, and the cyber world where our data resides. It's foreseen that by 2028, there will be 500 billion objects or devices connected to the internet versus the mere 8 billion people that were estimated to be alive then. Professionals in this area need to master a number of technical disciplines, including wireless, embedded systems, and artificial intelligence. But they're going to also need to understand economics, policy aspects, and privacy implications of these technologies. At Northeastern, we're promoting new models of research and education that put the individual professional at the center and create personalized curricula focused on experiential learning. Finally, it's important to continue to build bridges between academia, industry, the public sector, and nonprofits. The wireless and telecommunications area has a rich history of this kind of connection. And I hope this 6G Symposium helps to reinforce those bridges. So thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Okay, thank you, Dean Abode. We're grateful to have Northeastern here for supporting the 6G Symposium. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Andre Feuich, who is the Executive Vice President and CTO of AT&T Network Services. And he was instrumental in the creation of NextG Alliance, where he currently chairs the full member group there. At AT&T, Andre's been heavily involved in the push for open source software and open standards, which is now clearly one of the trends that's helping to shape the wireless evolution and will likely have an impact on 6G. So Andre, we welcome you to the 6G Symposium, and I'll hand this over to you for your keynote.
All right. Hey, thank you, Doug, and thank you to the symposium here and having me. It's an honor and a privilege, and I just really want to thank everyone for the opportunity here today. This is really all about how we together in North America can build a stronger position in the technology, in business, and the policy environment beyond 5G and explore the changing needs of the region in the coming decades. While I wish we could all be together in DC today and tomorrow, I'm glad that events like this have been possible thanks to the technology advancements we've made over the last few years. The acceleration in digital transformation and automation and increased consumer dependence on connectivity have created tremendous opportunities for our industry. At AT&T, our global network experienced well over 40% year-over-year increase in data traffic on an average day during the pandemic. While that's probably not a surprise to some, it is still important to underscore that we are in a new frontier of growth and innovation. We're not only witnessing unprecedented increase in demand and consumption of data, we're also experiencing unparalleled capital investment. So while our business and our customers are just beginning to realize the benefits of 5G, we recognize the need to look ahead and define the next G so that we can continue to be technology leaders. So over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to discuss three key themes. First, how did we get here? And I'll talk a bit about AT&T's network and 5G journey. Then I'll talk about what is up next, and that's what defining the next G is all about. And then how will we get there? And I'll talk a bit about what the Next G Alliance is working on. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll talk a bit about AT&T's network and 5G journey. So as we think about the path to 6G, it's important to look at our ongoing efforts in unlocking the full potential of 5G. Like every generation before, we can draw from experiences and lessons learned in building the next generation. It has been just over a decade since we began the 5G journey. And over that decade, AT&T continues to lead the charge for 5G deployment and applications for consumers and businesses. Our initial deployment strategy used millimeter wave spectrum to offer 5G plus in iconic destinations and key venues where demand on our network is very high and extra capacity and coverage is needed. AT&T 5G Plus is now available in parts of 38 different cities across the US. And by the end of this year, we expect to offer this service to parts of more than 40 cities. We began deploying 5G on our sub-6 low-band spectrum across select market areas back in December of 2019. We reached nationwide coverage in July of 2020, and we now cover more than 250 million people in nearly 500 markets across the country. AT&T's 5G non-standalone core is fully virtualized and running on common off-the-shelf hardware. And we're currently developing and testing our standalone 5G core to enable cloud-native network function and network slicing capabilities. And we'll continue investing in our network infrastructure to build out our 5G services. Our long-term goals are to bring AT&T's fast, reliable, and secure 5G to more consumers, businesses, and first responders across key areas, such as sports and venues, entertainment, travel and transportation, business transformation, and security and public safety, including FirstNet, the only network built with public safety and for public safety in mind. Here are just a few of the things we're proud about. At AT&T, AT&T has the most reliable 5G network based on nationwide global wireless solutions drive test data. Also, GWS also named AT&T as the best wireless network for the 4th year in a row. And we also have been awarded the nation's best 5G network by GWS, all of which we're very proud of. So if we go on to the next slide here, let's talk a bit about how we're fostering innovation. AT&T has a long history of innovation. We have always been at the forefront of technology. Much like 4G introduced the world to the gig economy, mobile 5G has jump-started the next wave of unforeseen innovation. We're cultivating the ecosystem today. As an example, our 5G Innovation Studio accelerates the path to market for many new product offerings and key strategic initiatives. The studio provides an environment where we can work with customers and industry collaborators to co-develop and advance 5G applications and bring 5G use cases to life. 5G is still early in its life cycle and is being evolved and enhanced through upcoming 3GPP releases while worldwide deployments continue. And while 5G is still early on the evolutionary path, we recognize the need to begin to promote early commitment to creating a 5G and to next G marketplace and to ensure that North America continues to lead in technology and development. Research leading to the next G is also very important. For example, the University of Texas at Austin has launched a 6G research center with the support of major wireless industry players, including AT&T, Samsung, and Qualcomm. In our long collaboration with UT Austin, they have demonstrated a unique ability to help define advanced wireless technologies and contribute valuable and targeted research. This new effort continues our collaboration into a new era of wireless communications. Advanced sensing, location, machine learning capabilities, and the use of terahertz spectrum are a few of the key aspects the research center is focused on. The 2020s will certainly be the decade for both 5G deployments and advancements, as well as the decade for creating 6G. So if we go on to the next slide here, let's talk a bit about defining the next G. While the improvements from 2G through 4G were quite impressive, they were largely linear, with each generation focused on providing more speed and more capacity. The 5G experience also provides higher speeds and capacities, but will ultimately do so much more. 5G is delivering immersive experiences that are much more vivid, dynamic, and interactive. We're seeing this transformation unfold in sports, retail, mobile gaming, smart factories, healthcare, and more. With each generation of wireless technology, the ramp gets more complex and challenging. If history is any indicator, technology will likely continue to progress into another International Telecommunications Union defined forum. We call this the ITU-INT in the 2030 timeframe, which will be dubbed 6G. As we look ahead, 6G represents an even greater opportunity to extend wireless solutions into almost every facet of human and machine interaction. We must establish 5G and beyond to the next G as a national agenda priority. 6G is still almost a decade away, but we need to start defining it now to allow time for research and standards to complete. While 6G is expected to revolutionize radio, network technologies, and architectures potentially based on the new IMT requirements, it is likely this work will not appear in a 3GPP release until after release 19 or 20, with commercial deployment readiness starting around 2030. To understand what 6G may offer, we must first understand where current 5G technology falls short in delivering the requirements needed to deliver evolutionary use cases and what technological advances are on the horizon in order to create a vision for 6G. This vision will drive a variety of possible new and extended use cases that are currently being discussed across the industry. Some of these use cases can be realized by means of the continuous ongoing evolution of current 5G technology. Other use cases most likely require a more radical step, that is a new generation of wireless and network technology for their ultimate realization. These standards will establish and address key technical challenges. So if we go on to the next slide here, let's talk a bit about these 6G trends. So here's some of the trends we expect to see. It is likely that 6G will push the spectrum envelope to terahertz region, enabling throughputs of up to 100 times that of 5G. The terahertz bands anticipated for 6G must coexist with the technology in the lower frequency bands. Lower frequency bands will also continue to be the wireless connectivity backbone for wide area coverage. So like the 5G extension into millimeter wave, extensions to very high terahertz frequency bands is a complement to lower frequency bands by providing extreme traffic capacity and extreme data rates through very dense deployments. We will also continue to see the trend in communications networks towards the softwareization and disaggregation of network elements into more granular microservices that can be spun up on the fly and operate relatively independently. Beyond 5G networks, there will likely be extreme edge or edge-centric and data flow based across this new network. There are multiple technology trends in the compute and storage space. Many of them are poised to have a huge impact on how we develop telecom software systems. Limits to Moore's law will start impacting compute and memory paradigms. So the current 5G systems have already caught the interest of many specialized vertical industry sectors. This trend will continue with next generation systems supporting even more challenging verticals across areas such as agriculture, automotive, healthcare, smart factories, smart cities, education, media, and entertainment, addressing societal and environmental goals. Now is the best time to conduct research in 6G to address technology challenges, including volumetric spectrum sharing and efficiency, intermodulation interference, and energy management and battery life, just to name a few. So if we go on to the next slide here, we'll talk a bit more about the 6G vision. From the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the radio access network to leveraging network sensing and adding spectrum bands, 6G will enable new and transformative applications. 6G will also further enable multi-sensory telepresence and immersion, which is extending reality services that encompass a continuum of experiences from virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, which requires extremely high wireless data rates, low latency, and high wireless reliability. These changes will advance mainstream holographic communication and revolutionize e-commerce, manufacturing, healthcare, agriculture, education, conferencing, and gaming. 6G may support everything from real-time remote surgery to fully autonomous driving, beyond visual line of sight, autonomous drones to immersive virtual reality. 6G will also enable Industry 4.0 and digital twins. Industry 4.0 has also been referred to as a smart factory or a lights out factory, an industrial environment that can run semi or fully autonomously. A digital twin is a virtualization model of a physical process, product, or service, which is a real-time representation of a physical entity entirely within the digital domain and can be useful in many IoT use cases where data is collected from sensors. Next generation first responder networks need to incorporate situational awareness, building on existing location services, which can include longitude and latitude and altitude, and also the rapid collection of data from sensors, known assets, and other sources using artificial intelligence-based responsive analytics. This allows for meaningful data analysis of situations, as well as secure sharing of data regarding personnel, assets, threats, and hazards in a manner suitable to providing emergency services operations. This also serves governments and other public agencies that require networks with national security requirements, ubiquitous high-speed connectivity for moving massive amounts of data in dense networks, and low latency communications to enable new generations of uncrewed and autonomous systems, both in the air and on the ground. Distributed and federated artificial intelligence and machine learning enabled by smart edge clouds has many other use cases and categories, whether they support millions of low bandwidth devices on a massive IoT network or networks with high bandwidth devices such as video cameras, which have enormous data sets and will be created at the edge of the network. In addition, next-G systems can be envisioned to employ artificial intelligence and machine learning for a more fundamental way, namely artificial intelligence as a foundation for air interface design and optimization. And of course, cybersecurity, privacy, and trust will be a key technology theme for the 6G era to assure societal acceptance of communications into the 2030s. Architectural disaggregation, multi-vendor, and open source software play as well as a multi-stakeholder supply chain, which will drive the need for sophisticated security mechanisms and concepts. 6G will advance smart surfaces and environments, enabling ubiquitous communications beyond just a smart device. As you can imagine, these expanded and new use cases will not only impact industries, but profoundly change the way people live. Users would have the ability to instantly connect with their doctors during morning workouts and catch up on the news via augmented reality glasses. Imagine watching concerts and celebrating your birthday with people around the world without leaving your home. Augmented reality could make it easier for people to find products and promotions and reviews. So moving on to the next slide, let's talk a bit about some of these 6G systems. The wireless network will need to be changed and updated to support such offerings. A move to disaggregated, virtualized, and open network technologies that would support performance, such as sub 1 millisecond latency. Network disaggregation will define modular, independent, and more granular network components end-to-end. Cloud-native approaches via continued softwareization of significant functionalities of the network, including in radio access networks, and the adoption of service-based architectures and open API approaches with security will all be required and necessary. Open source network components, automated code generation from standards for network modules, and further integration of software communities with standards and processes will allow quicker testing of features and improved time to market. These will all enable the spinning up of functions on demand and to chain them as needed. We'll also see a blurring of the line between the radio and the core, co-location of radio and core modules resulting in different network deployments. Artificial intelligence and machine learning would also be required for such networks. 6G will also be built with a network of networks concept, building on top of 5G support for non-terrestrial networks, uncrewed aerial vehicles, high altitude platforms, non-public networks, and of course, Wi-Fi integration. Network connectivity with seamless mobility and interoperability across heterogeneous radio layers in a secure and trusted environment are also necessary. The vision is a fully integrated heterogeneous network architecture in 6G, enabling reliable and ubiquitous service availability regardless of a wide area cellular terrestrial network coverage. On the device side, research is looking at advances in including screenless and skin wearable devices and extremely low power devices. Imagine the ambient internet of everything which brings intelligence to living and business environments to make them more sensitive, adaptive, autonomous, and personalized to human needs, with intelligent interfaces that recognize human presence and preferences and adjust smart environments to suit their immediate needs and requirements. So if we move on to the next slide, well, I'll talk a bit about how we're driving openness in this new 6G era. The paradigm shift of 5G to the next G needs an open architecture to succeed. Disaggregation and interoperability are key to realizing the full potential of a 6G world. The disaggregation of the RAN and the virtualization of the network functions that are expected need to continue into the future releases of the mobile network. Open RAN technology is maturing very fast. There are a number of deployments ready, open, and commodity-based hardware approaches for RAN solutions, and a number of actual Open RAN deployments in the field today running on commodity hardware. Our strategy is to adopt and implement Open RAN into our networks as the technology becomes available. We were one of the early pioneers in adopting open architecture and software-defined networks in our wireline transport network and our wireless core network, and we have seen the benefits that it can bring. It's harder to realize an open architecture in the RAN because of its highly complex and necessarily distributed technologies. However, empowered by principles of intelligence and openness, the Open RAN architecture is the foundation for building the virtualized RAN on open hardware and cloud with embedded AI-powered radio control. Multi-vendor deployments enable a more competitive marketplace and give network operators greater flexibility to draw on the innovations of multiple suppliers to upgrade their infrastructure with the latest technology. Combined, an Open RAN-enabled, machine learning-driven dynamic network will introduce a new era where mobile communications will empower the global economic infrastructure and enable new capabilities within business, between businesses, and for consumers. So if we move on to the next slide here, it's important that the industry, in collaboration with government and academia, get started now in defining the vision for the future 6G marketplace. The ITU will have its vision of the next IMT sometime next year, with requirements coming shortly thereafter. The next time of vigorous activity and radical change to meet these requirements really has already begun, and the US needs to be a leader in the decade creating 6G. 5G will serve as the foundation for our technological journey to 6G, building on current progress we've seen in 5G and adding new technological advances for 6G, which will lead to a more connected world and facilitate new capability domains. To help us get us there, Addis launched the Next G Alliance back in October of 2020, building on the Path to 6G call to action. While every company, institution, and research community will develop its own business strategy and unique product portfolio, the power of a collective vision is a core principle of the Next G Alliance. The Next G Alliance was developed as a private sector initiative and has grown quickly to nearly 50 full and contributing members from industry and academia. The Next G Alliance is intended to drive actions with government and 6G research communities. I have the honor of serving as a founding member and chair of the Next G Alliance founding member group. AT&T, Nokia, and VMware have taken on leadership of the steering group focused on R&D, standards, strategy, and policies for market readiness. AT&T is in full support of Next G's Alliance's mission and the upcoming 6G roadmap. We recognize the importance of this initiative in driving societal, environmental, and policy for the next G. So in closing here, my last slide, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. And as you can see, 6G is not only a technology revolution, but one which involves new approaches in policy, business relationships, and service delivery throughout the value chain. I'm proud to take part in envisioning the path to 6G and to support the Next G Alliance's mission of driving a vibrant 6G marketplace, while we continue to deliver powerful 5G solutions that transform our industry and all of the customers we serve. If 6G services appear around 2030, the next coming decade will be a time of robust activity and radical change. The work has already begun. As technologies leaders, I cannot think of a more exciting time for our industry. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and participation today, and I'll hand it to Tommaso to introduce our next session. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. I think your insights were, very, very helpful as usual. Looking forward to the next generation. So our next, we're going to have a fireside chat between two former chairmen of the FCC. Michael O'Reilly was nominated for a seat on the Federal Communication Commission by President Barack Obama on August 1st, 2013, and served until December of 2020. He has years of prior experience working in other US government positions and committees. And Jonathan Adelstein served as commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission from 2002 to 2009, for which he was twice nominated by President George W. Bush and confirmed by the US Senate. He also has appointment from President Obama to the US Department of Agriculture's Rural Utilities Service and the White House National Science and Technology Council. Jonathan is currently the president and CEO of the Wireless Infrastructure Association, WIA. Gentlemen, we're pleased to welcome you to the 6G Symposium, and I'll hand this over to you to proceed with your fireside chat. Thanks, everyone.
Mike, you want to lead off?
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Thomas, for introduction. I think we have agreed with my colleague here to start with a quick presentation each, and then get to the questions unless Jonathan disagrees. So I was going to make a few comments and proceed from there, if possible. Let me start by extending my deep thanks to InterDigital and to the Symposium for having this event and including a former FCC commissioner. As my fellow panelist, Jonathan Adelstein, can acknowledge, there is plenty of valuable contributions to make outside the boundaries of the commission. For instance, I've formed my own consulting corporate company and have joined a board of advisors of a smaller wireless integrator and installer, Mobilecom Professionals. When most everyone thinks of large industry participants, but when discuss wireless issues, there are so many small and mid-sized companies bringing enormous value by assisting the larger equipment installers and network operators to make things actually work. Turning to the topic at hand, I think it's appropriate to consider 6G as a journey and on a longer trajectory than the recent hype would suggest. While we should note that the pen has barely started to hit the paper on 6G, it is perfectly appropriate to begin the difficult processes to make it happen now. Also, in framing this, it is important to recognize that 5G is really in its infancy. There is a long road ahead for 4G, and 5G doesn't replace it. This is a decade or more of innovative services ahead for both technologies. Many of the advances of 5G and the standards are still being formulated and approved. It seems like just yesterday, I was talking about the expectations of release 17, and now we're on to release 18 and beyond. Many experts expect that the path to full fruition of 6G is around 2030, and it'll take tremendous cooperation between industry, academia, and government participants. Investment of time and money is essential for all of these entities. One feature that'll be critical to collaboration is openness and transparency. These early stages should be viewed as pre-competitive. But if we are to look at the early estimations of 6G, including some of the speakers so far today, including our just recent panelist on AT&T, it is envisioned to incorporate technology that allows the constant and close communication of devices in an always-on universe. Think of it more of a symbiotic relationship between humans and the next wireless communication technology, rather than serving merely as an enabler. One aspect of 6G that we know will be critical in making this happen is having the necessary spectrum available for commercial purposes. We can recognize early, even in this early stage, that new bands are going to be needed. That means preparing and cultivating in advance a pipeline of spectrum for future operations. Early indications are that very high bands, 70 gigahertz and above, may be critical. I spent good time working on these band frequencies with the notion that they may be used for 6G eventually. I must admit, although, that I'm somewhat troubled by where we are as a nation as it stands respect to 5G, certainly the mid bands. The last commission during my tenure worked extremely hard on both high bands and mid bands to make 5G a reality. But if we look at the current landscape, there's cause for concern. Beyond the 3.4 auction scheduled for auction next month, there is no more nationwide spectrum that has been identified, certainly in the mid-band spectrum. Having taken the lead on the lower 3 gigahertz, I'm worried by the slow pace by which it's being opened for commercial purposes, whether it be for shared or exclusively licensed services. Even Congress has recognized this and begun to legislate on the matter. And we know that by the point that Congress gets to legislating, we've already missed the curve. There are conversations on other bands, 7, 8, 12 gigahertz, but these are nowhere near ready for conversation to 5G services. In fact, these bands may be years away. That is not acceptable. Everyone recognizes that the portfolio of mid-band spectrum for 5G is not sufficient to meet expected needs. I think this raises a real challenge to this administration and the current commission to redouble their efforts to wrestle free spectrum from the Department of Defense and other agencies and rebuild the commercial spectrum pipeline. Certainly this is heavy lifting, but it must be done. Also, we need to prevent agencies from using the political process to undermine progress and decisions that have been made for our wireless future. A second component that I think is critical to examining the future of 5G is security, as our previous speakers have mentioned, making sure that networks are as secure as possible, capable of addressing any imperfections, and responding to nefarious individuals will be a telltale sign of whether consumers can trust the capabilities and technology. A popular conversation at the current time is Open RAN. There are a few lessons and concepts that should be kept as mind as we pertains to Open RAN and what it means for the formation of 6G. We should be mindful that Open RAN and security are not synonymous, certainly not at the current time. Open RAN can actually open the door to a more insecure environment by mixing different hardware and software produced by competing entities. Additionally, at no point should we slow our wireless deployment for Open RAN deployment and development. We must move forward on 5G and head for 6G no matter where we are on the Open RAN discussion. To produce a more secure environment for wireless communications, security must be incorporated on the front end and respected by the technology producers to the consumer's expectation for a much more interactive environment. So I will end there and get ready for the interactive phase with questions by my friend and the audience. To Commissioner Adelstein.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly, for your leadership on this. It's so great to join you, my friend, on this. And you know, I'm focused like a laser right now on 5G, so I welcome the chance to think ahead to 6G. But my hands are really full on the challenges of 5G. I guess my real message today, partly because of that position, is that we need to get 5G right to set the table to win on 6G technology, as I think you were saying, Commissioner. And that means the U.S. needs to continue to lead the world in deployment. I think practically because, I head the Wireless Infrastructure Association, and we represent the companies that build and develop and own and operate wireless facilities. And we're deploying a wireless broadband right now in communities across the country and facing the challenges and opportunities there. And I'm proud of what we did. As Congressman Latta said, the pandemic underscored how important it is to get broadband to every corner of America. And the increased reliance on broadband isn't letting up. We've always seen increases in demand, and we know that's going to continue to grow. And that's good news for our business, but it also presents kind of challenges and obstacles that we need to overcome. The wireless industry's networks investments, though, have been able to really help the entire economy sustain itself. As we were hearing earlier, we help businesses stay afloat. We help children keep learning. We help first responders help their health care for the people that needed it urgently. I mean, it's so much more. And I'm proud of how we stepped up to respond. And I think it's a model for what we're going to do for 6G. It's because of the wireless industry's innovation, with nearly 30 billion invested every year by the industry. It was, we're policymakers, we were policymakers, Commissioner O'Reilly and I, and it was really also due to our collaboration with the federal government. It was the supply of spectrum due to the leadership of decision makers like Commissioner O'Reilly. And, we needed to get the rules right on hard infrastructure as well, including siting and fees to get it built efficiently. And again, he was helpful, and we've had good policies in place to create a regulatory framework that promotes investment in responsible wireless infrastructure. And that's why the U.S. is in a better position. If you look at the numbers, we performed better than the rest of the world during the pandemic in terms of our wireless connectivity and the ability to keep up. So how do we build on that for 6G? Looking ahead, we're now moving fast, both as an industry and with support from policymakers, as we heard today from Congressman Latta, to prepare by getting 5G right and researching ahead to 6G. And part of that equation involves increased spectrum allowances so our brightest engineers can explore how to use new technologies and also make sure our technicians can deploy that. Commissioner O'Reilly and I agree on the essential role, as he said, of spectrum, and I applaud his leadership. I also applaud leadership of the Next G Alliance. They're providing the kind of guidance we need. The Alliance is assessing the whole potential of 5G and examining what the future holds. This group, which includes a lot of our members at WIA, is tasked itself with creating roadmaps for the further deployment of 5G and developing blueprints for 6G. And it's really bringing together leaders in the private sector and academic research so we can start solving those problems ahead. And, you wonder, as we're looking at this, why now? We're in the middle of 4G, thinking back, as history, when I was on the commission, 4G just debuted in 2009 for commercial use. And in 2020, 5G's just getting started, in 2020 in the mainstream. We have a long way to go. I mean, it's going to grow a lot in the next 5 to 7 years. And I think new use cases and capabilities will be explored throughout the decade. It takes years to really establish the basis and need for the next generation of mobile technology. So while we're thinking about 6G, we've got to first realize the opportunity that 5G presents. And it's not that easy. I mean, the business case needs to be there to justify the enormous investments our industry plans. We're talking about investing $275 billion to build out 5G. And there needs to be revenue to justify that. You think about what are the use cases for 5G, and most of the use cases are incredibly valuable in healthcare and automotive, et cetera. But so far, they're really not yielding clear revenue streams to the companies that build it. It provides revenue streams to a lot of other industries. But if we want to beat countries like China in the race to 5G and more broadly compete on the global stage, we need to make sure that business case is there. I'm not sure that there's anything that will hasten the rollout of 5G and therefore bring on 6G more than making sure the business case is there for the companies that are actually deploying this infrastructure. For the benefits go to other parts of the society. We call it externalities in economics. And the economics of 5G, and I'm sure of 6G, are going to be enormous. We've documented for 5G, literally trillions in economic growth, and 4.5 million jobs are going to be created by 5G. And yet those are not all in or for the wireless industry. So we've got to be investing as a society in that. We're doing that in the infrastructure bill. To beat countries like China in the race to 5G more broadly, we also need to train both the best engineers and the best workers in the field to deploy this new technology. We need to expand education and training to meet the demands of 5G and set the table for the next generation. Now, WI is leading the way by bringing registered apprenticeships for the wireless industry for the first time. And with the Telecommunications Industry Registered Apprenticeship Program, or TIRAP, we partnered with the Department of Labor to develop an initiative with employers to train many more workers for the jobs of the future. Because we need a workforce large enough and sufficiently trained to meet the demands of 5G and to make sure that they're there when 6G comes around. And the same goes for engineers. I mean, we need to be looking at what other countries are doing to make sure that people are being channeled into this industry and this space of electrical engineering and wireless engineering to make sure that we do that right. And finally, I'd like to say that, you know, with Congress poised to invest $60 billion in broadband expansion, we are going to bridge digital divide, but there was a real effort to make that only for fiber. Amazing in this country with all the talk about winning the race to 5G, that so many can say, oh, let's invest all of this money to expand broadband in fixed wireline networks that don't provide mobility, that get, you know, isolated to the individual place and not mobile for where people might need it for precision agriculture, for you know, rural areas where there's vast spaces to travel. 6G is not going to get done until 5G is out there. We need to get 5G in rural America. People say, well, this is wireline fiber is future-proof, but in fact, you know, if we get 5G built out to rural America, it'll make it easier to get 6G built on top of it. So we eagerly anticipate the passage of this historic infrastructure bill. We hope the House will approve it next week or as soon as possible, and that Congress needs to act on that. We made it possible within that law to fund wireless. Now we need to make sure as it gets implemented by the administration and in the states that 5G is a part of that, both fixed and mobile wireless, to make sure that we can win the race to 5G. And, you know, in the reconciliation bill, we need to make sure that we have the funding to train the workforce to get that investment built out quickly and efficiently. So I'm really thrilled to be part of this. We're learning a lot today about the future of wireless, and it's great to be part of the dialogue with you, Commissioner O'Reilly.
Well, so now we're going to turn to the interactive portion, I think is fair. I thought it might be, you know, helpful to start with some questions back and forth, if fair. And maybe we could pick up on the point that you mentioned at the end of your conversation there, Commissioner. You talked about future-proof, and there was this belief that fiber was the only successful future-proof technology for the internet and broadband services. And you and I both fought that in the Congress. I testified, you did the same, and we were aggressive in making sure that the legislation that is now to be considered by the House is changed successfully. Can you talk a little bit more about how the investment on the federal investment, that these dollars are how they're going to change both on the 5G and lead to 6G, how that is going to change, and how much the federal investment in wireless technology will really shape going forward?
Yeah, and thank you for your leadership. We worked together on that, and we managed to get Congress to change course. Congress was headed towards requiring 100 megabits upload speed and download speed and 20 megabits, 100 megabits upload speed symmetrical as the only way to get funding. So it was a gating factor to prevent wireless from being part of the funding, because wireless can't do those upload speeds without sacrificing download speeds people actually use. It was a remarkable exercise in lack of practicality to think about that's the only way to get future-proof. When you think about future-proof, look what's happening today in Louisiana, where the wireless network got up much quicker than the wireline network, because you know, you only have to restore power to the transmission site, and there's still enormous swaths of Louisiana that don't have access to wire line service, and because fiber got wiped out, it needs to be rebuilt. That's not future-proof. It didn't even make it through Hurricane Ida. And now if we'd been investing federal funds in that, we'd have to pay for it all over again. So the idea of 6G was actually, I think, used against wireless. They said, fiber is one and done. And fiber is fantastic. I mean, getting that out as far and deep into rural America as we can across the country is absolutely essential. It'll help support 5G. But the idea that, you know, because we're at some point 10 years down the line going to need to do 6G, we shouldn't invest in 5G now is a huge misnomer. Because if we can get 5G built out to rural America, we're going to be in a much better position. The technology itself is upgradable. It's the most, software defined ability to change that and to get 6G functionality into 5G networks. But if we don't get 5G to rural America in the first place, we're not going to be able to get 6G out there quickly either. So, now we have another challenge ahead of us with NTIA implementing the bill. And I hope they're thinking ahead, because NTIA and the Department of Commerce is going to be looking at 6G and working with us on research. And, funding is being provided, hopefully under the Endless Frontiers Act for 5G, and we'll be thinking about 6G. So let's make this a test bed for getting 5G everywhere. Don't you think, Commissioner?
No, you make a great point, and exactly the points that I picked up on it early on. Can you, what's your take? You already moved on to NTIA implementing the statute. I think we still got a House of Representatives to consider the legislation, and though there was deadlines talked about, it seems like they're being, getting ready to ignore them and tie to this other reconciliation package. What is your thought? Do they have to be tied together? Can we not move forward on one without having to consider all the complexities of reconciliation? And you and I both lived through reconciliation multiple times in different forums in our past lives. We know how complex it can be. I mean, we have, federal investments that can be made on hard infrastructure, both on the physical, transportation side, but certainly on the broadband side. Should that wait for the more complex conversation to complete?
Oh, you're right, Mike. For people that don't know us, we worked together in the Senate many years ago, back when we cut bipartisan deals on a regular basis. It was much easier to get things done back then. I think right now there's bipartisan agreement on the reconciliation bill, and they should get it done as soon as possible. We can't afford to wait. I mean, we need to start investing now in getting these things built. And I'm thinking that the House is going to pass it. I think it's just a question of when. And when they do, speaking of NTIA, it goes there. And as you well know, NTIA is the agency that oversees federal spectrum, which you were talking about. And when it comes to 6G, I think NTIA will get the fact that as a spectrum agency, that wireless should be included in this infrastructure implementation. And they're going to have a big role because they have huge authority to change the rules. And there's already an effort to get them to roll back the victories that we won in Congress and that we won in the Senate and hopefully in the House. So when it gets to NTIA, and when you think about the future of 6G, I mean, you were key in getting CBRS spectrum out there. You were key in getting high band spectrum out there. What do you see sort of as the future of additional spectrum that we're going to need? And what should Commerce and the Congress be doing to get CBRS, high band, and more spectrum into play for 6G?
Well, like you, I don't want to look to just to 6G now. I still am focused on 5G, and we need, to fulfill our obligation on mid bands that isn't done. And we've got, we've got an empty pipeline right now as I look at it today. And I worry, and I talked about, I worry about the role of NTIA, and are they, the last administration didn't seem to have an NTIA that was capable of fighting back against agencies that were using the political process for their own, their own gain. And that turned out to be disastrous, both domestically and internationally, and to undo decisions that were made based on science and fact and engineering. Really hard decisions that were made, and now to try and undo those, it's just awful outcome for government. People talk about what they expect or what they need from government is some certainty, and that's just the absolute opposite as we go forward. And I'm not confident that NTA is in a position, certainly without a head, to move forward and allocate new federal bands from federal to convert from federal spectrum use to commercial purposes. I don't know that they have the oomph or the wherewithal to do the heavy lifting, and that's something that's going to be needed from the industry. It's going to be needed from Capitol Hill. It's going to be needed from everywhere else to give NTIA the backing to expect, to what the job is actually in the statute of what you and I and staffers work to make sure that they actually had a role and are responsible for certain obligations, notwithstanding the pressures of any particular federal agency. And so we've got heavy lift to do on mid bands, certainly for 5G. When I look at, where we are on 3, 4, 5, I'm hopeful that we're closing the loop on and moving forward on the auction. I'm certainly not involved in any of the proceedings, but I'd like to believe that that auction is going to move forward and they'll make the 100 megahertz available. I worry about what's happening in lower 3 gigahertz. It seems to be heading into a morass, and we're slow moving process. And then other bands in mid-band are just barely being talked about, and that's really troubling when you need another 300 megahertz, in my opinion, for mid-band for 5G services. And then we turn the conversation to 6G. The last commission, I give kudos to the Chairman Pai for the work that we did on upper, beyond the high bands and the millimeter wave that we did with Tom Wheeler. But, Chairman Pai was really focused on some of the higher bands, 70 and above, and even above 100. And I know that industry has been working in the 200s and actually in the 400s on the terahertz space. So I applaud all that work that it was done. And we had the notion that this was something that would be ready for 6G. But there are a lot of things that are going to have to happen on the technology side. And I think AT&T, really, the spokesman there, provided a great picture of the heavy lifting and what's expected to go forward. So I'm not confident right now with where we are on a spectrum portfolio for the United States. Much more work has to be done, and aggressive activities need to happen. And that makes no friends, right? It makes no friends to do the heavy lifting. It makes no, it's not easy to make enemies in this political space, but that is what needs to be done for the sake of our nation and the progress we expect on wireless services for the American people. And so you and I are in different seats now than we once were, and we're going to use our voices to articulate that. I'm hopeful that spectrum policy can be corrected in the near term, but we do have some worries going forward.
Well, we sure do. Another good thing about the infrastructure bill is that it includes the requirement to get some more spectrum out through NTIA from DoD. And you think that'll be helpful? That's another reason to act on the infrastructure bill right now.
Yeah, I think that the infrastructure bill, I think most industry is begrudgingly accepting where we are. And I think that, there's some that are much more appreciative of the bill. And I think that's just something that is going to move forward. The timing is, you may know better than I in terms of how many weeks we're away from that being passed. But I think that that's inevitable, and we can move forward. There's a lot of good provisions in there. There's certainly a lot of questionable things that will need to be, scrubbed in the years ahead. I suspect some of the money will not be allocated properly. That's not surprising. And there'll be some heavy oversight needed by Congress going forward. But I absolutely think that, the spectrum pieces are helpful. I know there's new spectrum talked about for the reconciliation piece, and that the reconciliation piece, legislation is much more partisan. Looks to be done on a party line basis. And that's disturbing, as you and I know. Those are harder things to maintain. They're harder victories at the end of the day, and they don't lead to to ground that can stay stable. And so I worry about those things going forward. I worry about when a nation is led, when we're on razor thin majorities to make a partisan outcome on something so critical. So we'll just have to see how that goes forward. And I'll leave that to the legislating body as we once were. But can I turn the topic a little bit? I know you mentioned this in your remarks, and I'm interested in getting your take on training. How much, when I talk about, where we are in wireless and 5G and what's it going to take, I've talked about in the past about permitting and siting. I've talked about, equipment and supplies and the supply chain and the availability of things like fiber and the network and pieces, which are, and I also talked about labor. And labor is, a very difficult thing, and having the training, having staff trained to do wireless and the trenching for the fiber. Where do you think we are in terms of training for wireless technologies going forward, and what would be helpful? I know that Department of Labor has stood up finally, its organization, and you have a new responsibility. Congratulations in that picture. How do those things all tie together?
Well, thanks, Ed. I was just appointed to the Commission on Apprenticeship by the Secretary of Labor to advise him on how to bring apprenticeships into new industries like telecommunications. And that's the field work that needs to get done. You think about winning the race to 5G, which will set us up for 6G. We need to have the workforce to build that out. And we also need the supply chain to work. We need the equipment, we need the materials, and the labor all to line up at the same time. If you're a contractor trying to get something built, you need to have all three of those pieces basically sequenced together in order to get it done. And right now, all three are experiencing problems, but we're real focused on the workforce side and making sure that people in the field know what to do. I mean, we're a relatively new industry. If we look at our competitors around the world, like China, they don't have any problem getting techs trained to do this. They just tell a kid, this is what you're going to do. And there you have the small cell tech. This is what you're going to do. You have somebody to climb the tower. Here, we have to make people kind of choose that. So I'm pleased the government's working in partnership with us in the previous administration as well to try to get that done for telecommunications. If we're going to invest $60 billion and more in building out wireless and wireline infrastructure, we need to have the people to do it. And from the point of view of 6G, we also need to have the engineers at a higher level that are trained in electrical engineering, particularly wireless technology. And again, not sufficient what's happening in the country now. We have a handful of people pumped out of some of the best programs in the country at MIT and Virginia Tech, et cetera. But we need really to focus on this, to have enough RF engineers to help support the field techs that also have a basic understanding of RF and the techniques to build this out efficiently if we're going to do it quickly, safely, and get the job done. And we need those people to be around for the next 10 years, developing, growing in the field so that when 6G comes around, they can quickly upgrade these networks. So thanks for asking about that. And in siting as well, you were a real leader in making sure we can get things sited. Like if we're going to build out 5G and have the rules of the road in place for 6G, we need to make sure that we're not being charged excessive fees. There's already not enough investment to go around. We don't need to be taxed essentially the most valuable technology that has these huge benefits for society is the last thing you want to tax. Let's tax alcohol or, other things like that are causing problems, not this. I mean, let's talk about siting and all the work you did and what we need to do to make sure that we can get 6G and of course, first 5G built quickly and efficiently. What do you think needs to be done there? And the supply, I think we're in a better place thanks to you.
Well, your very kind words are much appreciated. I won't, I'm not going to support any new taxes on alcohol. My heritage would not appreciate that. But I understand your point, and certainly we don't want to be taxing something that was considered, some people consider an absolute necessity, comparable to housing and air and water. So I'm mindful of how important broadband can be, and the siting issues are so critical. People seem to dismiss them as just a trivial part of the equation. I was reading a recent case that's going to court in Virginia, and the rights of way already being used for electric network, and the landowners were objecting to the same aerial infrastructure, being used for broadband, and their point was we want to be justly compensated. And I understand that from a property perspective and a property rights perspective, but those individuals are preventing broadband from reaching their neighbors, their consumers, and themselves. And there's trying to find that right balance. I certainly am not for eminent domain, but we have to figure out the relationship between siting and rights of way and the fees that are being used. If we expect services to be available and we know how critical they can be, certainly during the pandemic, we have to be mindful that we can't have certain barriers and somebody standing, whether it be the local government in terms of their process or their handout in terms of what they're extracting or trying to extract. And we've seen this not only in private sector, we've seen this from localities, and we've also seen it from tribal entities. I remember from my early days, a tribe, came to me and said, well, we want your help to make sure that the wireless company that wants to cross our land agrees with us that we will own 51% of the company, the joint partnership. And I looked at them, I said, absolutely no way will I ever participate in such a function. And they were really annoyed by that and really despondent to that. And I think that's, what is the goal that, as a policymaker, which we're no longer, in those roles, it was to get broadband out to consumers. It's not at all costs, but it must be mindful that it can be done in a reasonable way. And the barriers and obstacles that people are putting up in terms of the processes and the shakedowns are just unacceptable. I appreciate the work that the last commission did in this space. I do think that there's, that only went so far, and some of the, some of the work was only going to be so helpful. But there has to be a recognition, and to me, I use the P word, and I testified this against my best interest. People on Capitol Hill don't want to hear the word preemption. it's going to take more preemption from the federal government to make clear that they want broadband services to reach every consumer that would like them. And we're going to have to figure out some of the payment mechanisms so we don't have this, these siting problems, whether it be on the wireless side or on the wireline side. We have to work through those issues, and anyone dismissing them or saying, "Oh, that's for another day," is really, missing the responsibility of what's needed to make this happen. And so I implore you, for the work that you did and the work that we did together to try and make this happen. And there's so much more that needs to be done. I'm not confident that we're going to see any progress in the very near future. There seems to be a commission that is worried about some, taking tough votes right now, and I get it, because the commission's kind of in a very awkward spot given the makeup. And I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. I throw a little bit of a non-6G question your way. You and I have lived through the political process, both as staffers and as appointed officials. What's your take on where things are and why we've seen such inaction or lack of action on nominees at the commission? And I say this in all honesty, when I look at the current makeup and the current acting chairwoman, who's a friend of mine, there can be no greater progressive mindset and liberal activist than Jessica Rosenwald. She embodies those visions and principles, and I respect her for those. I don't agree with her on many of those, but you have somebody that actually knows the substance and actually can carry forward and make the agency work for those purposes. And I find it, ironic from the other side. I'd love for this administration to pick some newbie that hasn't been involved in these issues. I think that would just set them back a couple of years. So from a practical perspective, I appreciate that. I don't understand the hesitancy on someone so committed and focused on the issue. And again, I'm working against my own interest. I don't have any conversations with this current commission, as my ethics prevent me from doing so, ethics bans. So I just find this, as someone who studies political, been part of the political process for so long. I'm shocked on where we are. I'm just don't understand why, someone so capable is for the vision and also for the activities being set aside. But I don't know what your take is on this.
Well, I think it's long overdue to get a nominee up, and she's doing a great job as acting chairwoman, fully qualified. And I can't tell you what the holdup is, but I can tell you we need to get that commission full as soon as possible for all the issues we've talked about. We need to get NTIA also staffed up. I think that, we're behind the gun now. You and I worked in the Senate. It would take a long time to get somebody through. It's already September by the end of the year in the best of circumstances. And these are the worst of circumstances. The Senate got a hands full with debt ceiling and reconciliation and infrastructure and funding the government, not having it shut down. And a lot of nominees are backed up already. So, there's a real prospect that we end up with a 2-1 Republican-led, not led, but there'll be a majority commission if we don't act immediately. The time is already running short for these nominees, and we need to get them in place as soon as possible. And you need all these elements in place to make it work. As you said, to succeed on 6G and 5G, we need to have the right siting and fees policies that encourage investment. We need to have the workforce that can actually build this out and can envision 6G. And we need to have the spectrum policies that enable 5G to succeed and build the ability for people to use the technology of 6G in high bands and other bands. I think I see a question here that came in on CBRS. You're seen as sort of the godfather of CBRS, and I think rightly so. How can we the question was, and it's a good one, how can you extend the success of CBRS to other bands? And what would you suggest doing differently? And how is it sort of a model for how both 5G can succeed and 6G going forward?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I'm sorry I missed it. I'm happy to answer because see the model that CBRS provides in terms of solving complex spectrum responsibilities and allocations really can be helpful going forward. And where I've envisioned, and there's many places that it would apply. Certainly, it's a tool in a toolbox. It's not the solution for everything. It's not, doesn't mean that we're not going to need exclusive licensed spectrum. It doesn't mean we're not going to have a need for more specifically unlicensed spectrum. But in those instances, and I look at it as part of the lower 3 gigahertz, it makes complete sense. I believe, and I've testified to this fact many times, that there's still another 100 megahertz for available for exclusive use licensed spectrum in lower 3 gigahertz, and then the rest of the band, the rest of the remaining, can be made for shared purposes that follow a CBRS model. They want to do so in some instances it may need an AFC, in other instances it may not. So we want to make sure we have the balance there. But I absolutely agree that CBRS is a proper tool and can be very helpful in this space. And I appreciate the hard work that the previous commissions did to make CBRS a reality. I hopefully carried it over the last 10 yards, but I think it's really been productive, and I'm really excited on what the innovative uses have been by the industry and how we're seeing private 5G take off from there. And so it really is an opportunity to change spectrum policy in those really difficult situations. And I notice our time is running low. I really want to thank InterDigital and our sponsors and turn this back to Tommaso.
That's a great last word. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for your insight and all your leadership. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commissioner Adelstein and Commissioner O'Reilly. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Very interesting discussion. And so I'd like to thank everybody for a great opening session. We're going to have a little break now, and we're going to reconvene at 11:45 Eastern Time, US Eastern Time, for a panel on finding a value proposition for 6G. Thanks, everyone.